Hello again, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's exciting to have you here at Grit and Gears. This is Busted Knuckle Academy. Class is in session, so shut up, sit down, and pay attention.
Okay, so today we're going to be replacing the front axle shaft on one side of the vehicle and rebuilding one on the opposite. So the first thing obviously you want to do is remove the wheels and support the vehicle either on jack stands or a twin post lift like this. Next is remove the nuts off the ball joint to release the lower control arm. This will not affect alignment if you do it this way. The next thing is the ride height sensor. I believe this is only on the passenger side. This is an R32. Yours may or may not have the ride sensor, but make sure you look for it. Up at the top you can see it wiggling around there. That's what it looks like. It's connected to a little box that has a plug in it. Next is going to be the sway bar and link. Once that is loosened, it just moves out of the way. Now there's a large bolt on the outside of the axle where it is connected to where the brake disc is that has some pretty significant foot-pound of torque on it. You're going to need to have somebody inside the vehicle put the brakes on and get a fairly large breaker bar to break that nut off. It's a 19 millimeter or maybe a 21 millimeter, and it's on there with a couple hundred foot-pounds of torque, I believe. This is the inside of the axle, and what you see there is a triple square. There is, I believe, 6 to 8 of these, and you're going to have to rotate the axle and take each one of these bolts out, as you can see is being done here. And once that happens, you can get a little pry bar in there and pop the inner out, and the outer should just slide out fairly easily. Now this is the one that we're going to rebuild. So that's an outer retaining sleeve. There's an inner retaining, I guess you could call it a sleeve. It's a clamp, like a hose clamp without the bolt portion. It's a compression or a squeeze type clamp that holds the dust boot here in position. So you have to remove those two. A lot of times the reason an axle goes bad is because the boot here that you can see gets torn and all the grease comes flying out of it. That's what happened on this one. And a good way to indicate it is time to replace your axle and or have it rebuilt is when you turn a corner, you'll hear either a grinding or a clicking noise. And once we get this off, you'll be able to see exactly what that is inside there making that noise. Now mine was not doing that, but we did notice that the boot was torn. I ordered replacements for both sides, and they sent me 2 of the driver's side instead of a driver and a passenger, so that's why we're rebuilding this one. To reinstall it, it's just the opposite of taking it apart, basically. So if you have replacement units, you just pull the old one out, put the new one back in, bolt everything together, and you're good to go. As you can see, he's taking just like a box knife and cutting the boot to separate it so we can get to what we need to on the inside. And you can see some of the grease that's kind of nasty looking there. There's a better shot, and you can see that's what an inside of a CV axle looks like. And that's the outboard side closest to the brakes. The inside looks the same basically as this. Um, he's just removing all the old grease, and then we use some brake parts cleaner and such to get all the old grease out, because you want to have this perfectly clean before you go putting it back together. At the same time he's inspecting, there's 2 or 3 different components in there that he's inspecting to make sure it's okay to go ahead and rebuild. And the guy that you're seeing here, his name's Jose. He's actually a Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche master technician. Now he's got a drift. This drift is going to help remove the outer from the inner, which allows you to get everything nice and clean, and make sure everything on both halves is in good shape. And that's me pulling that off the outer. There you go. That's what the actual shaft is, and then the CV portion is in what was removed. And it's easier to get it clean and get everything out of the way. Note this sleeve right here. So there's 2 of them. There's like a washer and a sleeve there. They'll have to be either replaced or reused depending on. He's inspecting the shaft to make sure there's no damage, because if this part of it was damaged, then you would have to replace the entire shaft. And basically what you're seeing here is what they do when they quote-unquote remanufacture an axle shaft. So if you buy a remanufactured unit, this is basically the process. They'll do this operation for both sides, and then they sell it as a remanufactured unit. And of course, both this and the side that you don't see is going to get a thorough clean and inspection to make sure everything's acceptable to be put back together, or else you're kind of defeating the purpose. Volkswagen does sell a rebuild kit for this operation, and that's what we used to do this particular video. Now we're coming over to the opposite side. You'll see is there's some what look like bearings inside of there, and that's what allows the axle to turn and move at the same time and go up and down and everything that happens. Again, like I said, mine was not making any noise. It just had a torn boot, and most of the grease was slung out of it. So while we had it up in the air doing some other maintenance to the vehicle, we decided this would be a good thing to do now, so I wouldn't have to worry about replacing it later, because they are pretty expensive on an R32. But he's just removing all the grease manually and inspecting each one of those bearings in that centerpiece and the outer sleeve to make sure it's all in good shape and there's no flat spots or what have you. And then we went to a like a brake parts type cleaner to clean out all the old grease. This is some factory replacement grease that comes in the rebuild kit from Volkswagen. You want to be very generous with this stuff, and you want to make sure you squeeze it in there really good and get everything packed in there, because if you don't, of course, it's not going to have enough lubrication and it is going to fail. That's the new boot going on. The dust boot basically is what it's called, and that's included in the rebuild kit as well. You got to make sure you get it down over, there's a little ridge, and then you get it all the way up against, and you can see that new squeeze clamp that holds it in place. Now notice he's lubricating the inside of there as well. And what that's basically doing is it's packing some grease inside where the spline is, so that when the unit gets pushed back onto here shortly, that you'll see there's grease both inside where those little balls and that little gear is, as well as inside the boot. So if there's any excess that's needed, it's there for lubrication purposes. Now he's putting that washer in that sleeve back into position there before we put the CV. That's very critical that that goes back in there, because that's like a limiting sleeve that prevents it from getting pushed in too far, because that can cause damage. And then there's the outer dust boot clamp, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. And then the outer part of the CV is going to be going back on. Now, if you remember, initially it took a little bit of effort to get that thing off. It's going to take the same amount of effort to get it back on as well. You have to take a like a brass hammer or something sometimes and get it to, it almost like clicks into place, which you'll see here in a second. You see the amount of grease that's in there. And then once that's on, what you'll see here in a second, right there he's using the old bolt to hammer it back basically into position to prevent damaging any of the splines, and that bolt is threaded in about 3 or 4 turns, almost to the point where it's bottoming out, so it protects the threads while you're hammering on it as well. This is the only way really to get this thing back on and know that it's in position properly. There, as you see, it slid on and bottomed out. Alright, now it's just a matter of getting the dust boot lined up properly and these 2 retaining clamps crimped down properly and installed back on the vehicle. Installation is just the reverse of how we took it off. And that'll conclude this video. Just want to thank you for watching Grit and Gears, and we will see you on the next one.